Hello everyone, welcome to my Resident Evil 0 hard difficulty, no damage walkthrough, as you can no doubt tell from the intro I left in, which is the intro you get every time you start out Resident Evil 0, which is one of my favorite parts of Resident Evil 0, even though Resident Evil 0 in my opinion is probably the Resident Evil game that's my least favorite, for a lot of reasons, but I'll get to those when they do occur in the video. I mean, you obviously won't be seeing a lot of the issues where I get hit, because this is a no-damage walkthrough, but I'll be going into great detail about the things I don't like about this particular Resident Evil game. I'll be making comparisons, and I'll be demonstrating all the strategies I use for this game. So at the beginning, get rid of those 3 zombies, and then right here you're going to have to get rid of 2 dogs by going to this corner here, and then just using the auto-aim to triangulate where they are. And once you lock onto the first dog, just do not stop firing. And they will both die very fast. I gotta say though, the dogs on this game are a lot fairer than Resident Evil 1's dogs, because they actually flinch consistently. I mean, I can't really discuss much about the dogs, because you only ever encounter the dogs in this one chapter. This is it. There's only 4 dogs in total throughout the duration of Resident Evil 0, and it's all on the train level. It's very strange. It definitely goes to show that Capcom respected keeping certain enemies around to give a lasting impression for the player, rather than just overly using them, which is pretty cool. So as you can definitely tell, I'm trimming out all the stupid door sequences, because I have no respect for the door sequences, and they take up way too much time. You will not believe the amount of door sequences I trimmed out just for this particular level. I trimmed out roughly 9 minutes worth of door sequences, and it turned a 25-minute video into a 16-minute video. Can you believe it? I even reached the maximum clip limit that SHAREfactory can support for track 1, so I had to export this entire video to the gallery, and then I had to edit out all the parts that I didn't edit out on my first try with SHAREfactory. Which was the first time I've ever had to do that when I'm making a video like this. So anyway, right here, you're going to be using the service lift to move items between yourself and your partner. And you always want to put Rebecca in this room, because Rebecca is not as capable as Billy. She fires weapons very slowly, and she dies a lot faster on hard difficulty. Whereas Billy, he just doesn't have any sort of problem with him whatsoever. I mean, the only biggest problem with Billy is that he's incredibly slow to throw Molotovs, and Molotovs on this game are incredibly useful against Leechmen. And you definitely need a lot of Molotov cocktails for this game if you want to deal with certain encounters easily. So after you get the conductor's key from Rebecca, you're going to need to kill off all these zombies as you're making your way back to the other end of the train. And somehow I got a lucky decap. The decapitation rate is about 10% for the pistol, whereas for the other weapons, like the shotgun for instance, it's 100% decapitation rate, which is one of the greater things that this game does better than Resident Evil 1, because in Resident Evil 1 it was like 60% decapitation rate for the shotgun and 70% decapitation rate for the assault shotgun, all to allow the enemies to turn into Crimson Heads, which is really stupid. Like, the whole point of the shotgun is to prevent enemies from turning into Crimson Heads on Resident Evil 1. Why the heck do you have to put in such an artificial handicap just to allow the enemies to transform? That was one of the dumbest things from Resident Evil 1 that I'm so glad is not in this game, because of course there aren't any Crimson Heads in Resident Evil 0. So there's a lot to discuss about this particular Resident Evil game, because this is the final Resident Evil game to utilize the fixed camera angles before they eventually swapped to Resident Evil 4's over-the-shoulder perspective, which was the first time a game developer has actually used the over-the-shoulder perspective. And I'm honestly glad that they got rid of the fixed camera angles, because if you've been watching all my videos for the Resident Evil games, I go into so much detail about why I hate the fixed camera angles in this game, or in any of the other older Resident Evil games. It's literally because the fixed camera angles get in the way of the gameplay all the time, and it just provides an artificial handicap for the enemies to deal damage to you. The amount of times you get screwed by fixed camera angles whenever you're trying to do a strategy that is supposed to work perfectly is obnoxious, and it's really stupid. Like, the fixed camera angles will delay your inputs, they will hide enemies, and it screws with your audio all the time. Like, there's so many different reasons for why the fixed camera angle is trash. And also right here, pick up the ice pick and then swap to the knife. The knife is incredibly good against Sting, because as you'll see, oh, right there, he's going to do his running attack if he puts his arms in front of his face like that, so run away from it. It has a lot of range, and the hitbox can be a little dishonest. And as you can see here, the knife is actually stunning Sting after one hit, which is really good. But something you need to note, when you're trying to close the distance to Sting, wait until he's in a neutral state before moving, because if you move towards Sting while he's in this stunned state, he will immediately start his running attack and just cancel his stun state as a counter animation to you running towards him. And make sure you stand on the left-hand side just so Sting doesn't hit you with any kind of counter animation, because he does do damage on his dying state. And if you stand on this side, you won't get hit by it as much, thankfully. And where I'm standing right now is perfect. I don't need to move forward that much in order to make sure I'm connecting my hits with Sting. And just remember, only move when he's coming at you, and he dies really fast, which is really great. You know, it's definitely a nice introductory boss to a Resident Evil game that has some really trashy boss fights, and its boss fights are probably some of the worst boss fights ever made for the Resident Evil series. Not some of the worst. Resident Evil 0 has by far the most poorly designed bosses ever. And you'll definitely encounter that when you get to the giant bat in the church area. Because the giant bat in Resident Evil 0 is by far the worst boss fight ever made in the Resident Evil series. And I'm not even going to go into it in this video. I'm going to go into it like crazy when I get to that part of the game. Because it is by far an abject failure in boss design. Because it's not even the boss you're fighting. You're just fighting all the fundamental mechanics of an older Resident Evil title. And it just completely backfires on you, and it just allows the boss to get all these advantages on you and completely decimate you. And while it does die in 5 incendiary rounds, that does not excuse the fact that it should have been designed better. You know, like, the amount of people that complain about that boss fight in Resident Evil 0, that is definitely understandable. That's the one thing I can definitely agree with when it comes to the Resident Evil community's thoughts on that boss fight. Whereas with everything else, the Resident Evil community is not the best when it comes to judging anything else in regards to a Resident Evil game. But at least there is a mutual understanding of how crap that boss fight is. So anyway, we're going to be making our way back to where Rebecca is, because we need to give Rebecca the ice pick so that she can free herself from the room. Then we're going to be using the panel opener to open up the panel that will allow us to gain access to the dog kennel area. And we're going to be using the hunting gun that I picked up after I killed Sting in order to kill off the 2 dogs, because the dogs die in 1 hit from the hunting gun, which is really nice. But we're just going to drop the hunting gun immediately once we've finished using it on the dogs, because the hunting gun's only really useful against the dogs. And this is the final time we'll be encountering dogs, because as I've already mentioned, there's just 4 dogs in Resident Evil 0. It's very strange that they only ever utilize the dogs 4 times throughout the full duration of Resident Evil 0, and it's all on this particular level. But then they use a lot of plague crawlers and hunters in a lot of the later parts of Resident Evil 0. I'm not even going to mention the monkeys and the spiders, because you only ever encounter the monkeys like 1 time, and also the spiders 1 time, or maybe like 2 times actually, as like mandatory parts. But if you revisit older areas, the monkeys and the spiders and hunters and plague crawlers, they'll be in those areas. Because that is a thing in Resident Evil 0. If you revisit old areas after completing certain events that progress the story, if you're wanting to get ammo or something, they will repopulate those areas with enemy types. So obviously, for the best possible experience in Resident Evil 0, you have to get it so that you're not having to revisit those old areas, because you will get decimated by those enemy types in such clustered areas like that. And it's stuff like that that causes a lot of people to believe that Resident Evil 0 is the hardest out of the fixed camera-based Resident Evil games. But I severely disagree with that statement. I think Resident Evil 3 is a lot harder because it's hard for all the right reasons. I just think that Resident Evil 0 is hard for all the wrong reasons. Because, I mean, you're having to manage your inventory between 2 partners, which is kind of a clunky process. I mean, it's not as clunky as Resident Evil 5's inventory system. And then you have the terrible hit stun mechanics, because hunters just don't get stunned by anything unless you're using acid rounds or a magnum. Like, leechmen have incredibly trashy hitboxes, and they place enemies in some really annoying areas. You know, just based on what I've listed so far, it sounds like they tried to take a very lazy approach to the difficulty in Resident Evil 0 simply for the sake of it being difficult, because they knew that the common gamer would never be able to judge the difficulty properly. You know, like, if you're embracing stuff like terrible hitboxes, terrible checkpoints, and, you know, dying repeatedly after loading into the game for a split second, you know, stuff like that, that's not difficulty at all. That's just straight up cheating. And, like, let me give you a better example. The giant bat. One of the fundamental reasons it's a trash fight is because it screws with the fundamental mechanics. It screws with your auto-aim because you have all the smaller bats screwing with your auto-aim, and it makes it so hard to hit the boss. You know, if you're fighting the auto-aim system and not the boss, can you call that difficult? That's not difficult, that's just lazy and broken. It's just so dumb, and how people can call that difficult is beyond me. If something is poorly put together, it shouldn't even be out there, you know? If something's broken, don't use it. Just get rid of it. And that's the same approach you gotta take with difficulties. You know, if something is broken in its systems, you can't call that difficult. Because when you call something difficult, it means, oh, it's been properly put together, so therefore it's gonna be serviceable for all the challenging but fun reasons. You know, that's not the right reasons at all. You can't call Resident Evil 0 difficult if it embraces stupid things like terrible hitboxes and poorly designed boss fights and stuff like that. You know, like, one of the main reasons why I consider Resident Evil 3 to be the hardest out of the fixed camera-based Resident Evil games is because it doesn't embrace as much bullcrap as the other Resident Evil games. You know, there's still a bit of bullcrap in there, like for instance with the dodge system. I mean, I've said many times that the dodge system in Resident Evil 3 is a lot better than Resident Evil Revelations dodges, but when you're having to dodge, like, grabs, for instance, I mean, it works fine, but when you're having to dodge attacks that are not grabs, the dodge completely messes up because Jill has to do these multiple different dodge animations for a particular attack instead of just one dodge per attack animation, and she can put herself in some really bad spots because of it, and she gets hit while dodging, and you get no iframes when you dodge, which is really stupid. But aside from that, that's really the only, not the only thing, rather, because there's still a lot of moments where the auto-aim kind of screws you, because I encountered that a lot when I was trying to fight Nemesis knife only in the treatment plant facility, because I kept trying to aim for the switches that disperse the acid, but my auto-aim was screwing me. But that's really all the bullcrap moments I can think of in Resident Evil 3. You know, the only bullcrap moments you'll be seeing are with the dodge system and with the auto-aim system, but with the dodge system, you just gotta know when to, and where you should use it. And with the auto-aim system, you just gotta learn to position yourself so you don't get screwed by the auto-aim system. And you have yourself a completely serviceable hard experience that deserves the title being hard, compared to Resident Evil 0 in most cases. But anyway, back to what's happening right now. We have to stop the train from crashing. Pick up the pistol ammo here, and then pick up the key card. Because we need this key card in order to apply the brake system to stop the train. So don't forget it, because if you forget it, you're screwed. There's no way you'll be able to get back here in time to pick it up and then just apply the key card to the necessary spot. It's very funny when it happens, but it's not very funny when you have to redo all of that if you didn't save sooner. And make sure you take this path that I'm taking. One, you'll be able to avoid the zombies, and two, you'll be able to get the resources in here if you missed out on anything. And be careful of the leeches. The leeches aren't so much of a problem so long as you can get through the room very fast, but if you linger in the room for too long, they will damage you. They do about 1 damage, thankfully, so it's not too much of an issue. And I'm trying to bait out this guy's grab right now, but I don't recommend doing it unless you have a knife. The reason why is because when you do the downward slash with the knife, it shifts your hitbox. And compared to Resident Evil 1, the enemies are more aware of hitbox shifts on your character model, so they'll do their attack animations incredibly early, and it can definitely help in baiting out their attack animation and then just running past them during their recovery frames. But this trick only seems to work better against zombies, because zombies only ever do 1 grab attack, and the grab doesn't have a lot of range, so you're not at any real risk if you do the trick properly. So if you use the downward slash from the knife, you can bait out their grab attack and then just run past them. The only issue is with clunky hitboxes, because sometimes during a moment in their recovery frames, they can initiate the grab animation because somehow the active frame period is alongside the recovery frame period for a brief second. So bear that in mind when you're trying to run past zombies on this game. It shouldn't exist, but it's something you gotta deal with. But that is the end of the train level. We are now moving into the training facility, and we are going to be entering a massive save haven. And I'm going to be dropping a bunch of items in here, and I'm going to be creating a save, and then just concluding the part here, because I'll save the entire training facility level for the second part of my walkthrough. up until the basement area of the trading facility. So stay tuned for those. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.